Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to call to order this Friday, September 13th. It's an auspicious day, policy committee meeting. Um, and yeah, maybe we can start and have people introduce themselves. If we want to start maybe down on the end with Rob or with Eve. I'll go first.
Rob, technician.
Michael Gustin, Assistant Treasurer.
Jim Crossett, Board Member.
Ben Lindy, board member.
Kendra Matt, Board Member.
Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Karen Ingram, PSPPL representative.
Okay, welcome everybody. I don't think we need I was telling everybody, despite having served as board president for 2 years, this is actually my first time serving as a committee chair. So some of this I'm learning as we go. We don't need a motion or formal attendance role or anything like that. Okay, great. So today's agenda, I'm hoping that the most important thing we can do is talk about number 3, this proposed topics and calendar for the remainder of 2024. Grateful to my colleagues on the board and for the administration for submitting items. Grateful to Phyllis for putting together a list that we can look at this morning. But before we do that, we have one very quick item, which is around this alcohol waiver for the Hyde Park Pumpkin Chuck Festival for this year. And I was hoping that could, Dan or Stephanie, would you just particularly for Mr. Crossett, just talk about the alcohol waiver process?
Yeah, of course. So the board policy generally is that alcohol cannot be served on any CPS campus. However, there is a process when a group organization is going to host an event where they'd like to serve alcohol. The board has a process wherein they can seek a waiver, and those traditionally have come through the policy committee for a quick review, and then if approved, moved on to the full board for a vote. The Hyde Park group, which I think is online, is this is at least their second year of requesting a waiver for this event.
That's great. And if we do have some Hyde Park folks who are online, Rob, do we have? That's great.
Yes.
And we're very supportive and would welcome a minute or two. But please don't feel like you need to spend a whole lot of time. And we're grateful that you're here.
Good morning. My name is Shannon Carroll. I am a member of the PTO at Hyde Park and the chair of the Pumpkin Chuck again this year. I presented to many of you last year, and at that time I presented a very in-depth PowerPoint. Some of you may remember. So today I didn't prepare a PowerPoint. I kind of just wanted to read through some notes. And if you have questions at the end, please go ahead and ask them. So yes, last year, 2023, Pumpkin Chuck was the first time we sold beer, and it was quite successful from a control and safety standpoint. And we also received very positive feedback from the community that it was made available for the first time. The team and I very diligently plan to meet or exceed the requirements outlined in the permit, the F permit from the state of Ohio, which resulted in that compliance. So we had a very solid process of IDing and issuing wristbands. We had very clear signage indicating the alcohol perimeter. We had very diligent volunteers and leaders that were on site. And because of that, I credit that there was no incident of intoxication. We had a very positive experience. We're planning on doing a basic copy paste from the event last year in terms of the event layout. So separating the chucking, which, things are flying through the air and people are using a trebuchet and a catapult. The alcohol is not permitted in that area. There's very clear signage to indicate that, and that is thoroughly communicated to our volunteers. And then we have the area where the alcohol is very clearly allowed. We're offering the same beer through Mad Tree. Same setup and controls will be in place. And because of the positive outcome and feedback that we received from the community last year, we are requesting again CPS signature of our temporary permit tenancy form, which is required to submit the F permit application to the State of Commerce. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
Any questions from board members? Ms. Matt?
Yes, thank you for sharing this information. So my questions are about the alcohol. So when individuals are purchasing alcohol, is it a certain amount that they are allowed to purchase within one transaction?
That is not something that we did last year, but something that we could institute this year. I do know that the servings are limited to 16 ounces.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. And then in terms of monitoring, just to ensure that individuals are not intoxicated and may want to purchase additional alcohol, what are the processes in place for that?
Right. So it was just in terms of like people using their best judgment at the ticketing area. We have those separated. So the alcohol's in one area, like many festivals, and the ID and ticketing are in a separate area. And the people that are specifically at the ID check and the ticketing, as well as the beer sales area, they were informed that they should be on the lookout for people that seem to be intoxicated and to notify the ones that were patrolling the leadership team. So it's myself. I also have a co-chair and the rest of the PTO who are in charge of various areas of the festival were assigned in terms of leadership to just kind of like give each other a heads up if that's occurring. Like I said, we had 0 instances of that happening last year. So I do not anticipate it happening, but that is something that we had thought through prior to the event last year. And I plan on, having some rigor around that again this year as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm glad that there were no instances last year. Just I'm always from a lens of wanting to make sure that we're being preventative. So I'm glad to hear that there is conversation and hopefully there can be a little bit more detail to that process in the event something like that was to occur. What are the procedures in place to ensure that it's handled effectively?
Okay, that's very good feedback. And that's something that I will build out this year. And I'd be happy to share with the board once I've kind of ironed that out with my team.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. Jim, any questions on your end?
No question, no questions. Thank you for your organization around this event and your diligence to ensure that it's safe and that people are not endangered. Appreciate it.
Right. Yes, for sure.
And I'll just close by saying I've been a Hyde Park Elementary School dad for about 4 years now, and have been to 3 or 4 different pumpkin chucks, including the one last year with alcohol, and I thought it went really nicely. So thank you for all your work. Any administrative comments on the alcohol waiver? Okay, let's take a quick vote, and we'll just do a voice vote. All in favor of recommending the alcohol waiver to the full board for approval at our next business meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it is recommended. Thank you. You're welcome to stay. And we'll also move on to our next item. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question real quick. When, Ben, when is the next board meeting? When could we expect to understand if it's approved or not approved?
Yeah, it's not next Monday. So it
Okay.
would be the 23rd is our next
Okay.
business meeting.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate your time.
You too. Thanks. Okay, so moving on to item number 3 on our agenda this morning. I'm grateful to be able to spend as much time here as we need. But if people look, this is all posted to Board Docs on Wednesday, but you also have it, I think, in hard copy in your packet. The second page looks like this, and it's got 2 parts to it. It's got a top part on an overall meeting structure. This is all proposal. And then a calendar for board member requests, again, proposal at the bottom. And I wanted to start by just looking at the top together. I would certainly invite, Dan or Stephanie, if they have anything they'd like to add on this. But when I was on the policy committee back in calendar year 21, so this would have been a minute ago, the administration did a nice job of every 3 years making it through every policy we have so that they get reviewed and any changes get recommended for the policy committee to review. It's just like a good house cleaning is probably not the right word, but it's like healthy, I think, to go through these, check to make sure they're still relevant, see if there's been any state law, federal law that's come up that needs to make them changed, or differences in district level priorities. And I would love to see us get back to doing some of that, so that we're playing the role that we need to play to make sure we're doing good management of our overall policies. So my proposal was that we have some time every month to work through whatever general counsel's office wants to bring as part of that 3-year review cycle. Anything you want to say about that, Dan?
No, we'd be very glad to get back to that sort of review process. Sometimes we bring the policy and have no changes to recommend, but it still is an opportunity for the board to read it and make any comments. So we'd be very glad to get back to that process again.
And so the times here are loose, like there may be months like today, for example, when Dan and I talked on Wednesday, I don't think there are any things, for this meeting. So it's going to be 0 minutes this month, but it might be 20, it might be 30, it would depend on what they have. The second idea then here is that we hold a good chunk of time for the topics that board members have asked the policy committee to consider. So this could be the CPS Foundation policy. It could be an Innovation Council policy. It could be, I'd like us to take a look at the superintendent evaluation policy. I know Kendra had brought up an interim employee or interim superintendent policy. So there are a number of different, different board members submitted different requests. Idea would be we work through everything people have asked us to take a look at over the course of the next September, October, November, December. And then I really would like us to leave some time to be responsive to stuff that just comes up. Like I don't think we knew that we were going to do more work on the AI policy until the board meeting we had on Monday. And I think there will be other things that we don't know in advance that we're going to need to look at. And so that we leave some time each month to look at those. And then I do like that we have a hearing of the public. That was something Mr. Moraski always did when he was here. I would love to keep that. But I really do want this to be our committee, something that all three of us think, is the right and best use of the time. But I am kind of a structure guy. I like that having a plan, doing something on purpose, being consistent about it. And so I wanted to bring this to Kendra and to Jim just for your feedback and see what you all thought.
Looks good to me. I like process. I like structure. It'll be very helpful.
Well, I think we are all in alignment because I also like structure and process. So
All
thank
right.
you for creating this and giving us something visual to know what our timeline is and what we'll be working on. I do want to add, and I know Dan and I are working on this, possibly including, and it depends on whenever Dan and his team are ready, but a transportation policy that we're kind of working through or trying to flesh out a little bit more. So I'm anticipating, Dan, we talked about maybe October or November.
Any of those is fine. Yeah.
Okay. So just including that to the schedule.
That's great. And could I ask, Phyllis, do you have a copy of this document that's in an editable format, I think? Could you add transportation then? Let's just do October.
Okay.
That way, if it takes more time than we think it's going to take, we have more time.
Okay.
And if it takes less time, great.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
Dan, does that work for you? It's not too fast. We can slow down if we need to. Okay. Cool. So that was the first top of the page. The second part of the page was my first swing at how to sequence all the different requests that we received. So some board members submitted, 2, 3, 4 topics. Some board members submitted 0 topics. But everybody who, I hope, unless I missed something, everybody who requested something has it on here. And I did my best to try to spread them out. So, not everybody has all of their things considered the very first month, but over the course of the rest of the year, we work our way through all of them. And I think, I would propose that we kind of march through them in this order. But I'm also very open to feedback. Jim or Kendra, do you see any reasons to shift any of this?
No, I don't see any reason. I do hope, though, that we have, like we're adding transportation topic, as we have, as the next 3 months occur, that we have some flexibility to continue to add topics if we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can decide if this needs to become a 2-hour committee meeting instead of a 90-minute committee meeting. I'd like to aim for 90 minutes, but if we need it for important work, then we can certainly do that. And I'm glad we have Interim Superintendent Murphy here too. As you look at this, any feedback for us? Are there any changes that you'd like to see us make?
Thank you, Board Member Lindy. My only comment looking at this is when I go back to my office, I want to line it up with what you guys approved last Monday in terms of board and CAL presentations, because maybe the closer the policy work is to those calendars might be somewhat helpful for information. Not a deal breaker, but might be somewhat helpful to consider.
That's great. And I'll just say, like, open to feedback. And if in looking at those two calendars, it would be helpful for us to move some of these things around. I think the thing that's important is that everybody who would like something considered gets it considered. And then everybody can see in advance that it's going to be considered, and know in advance when that'll happen. Okay. This part was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. So we're just going to keep moving. Yes, ma'am.
So to Interim Superintendent Murphy's point, do you think that by the next policy meeting, you and your team will have an opportunity to maybe look at that schedule to see if there's alignment, if we need to move anything around?
I'll give it to you today
Oh, okay.
by close of, this evening.
Okay. Okay.
Just feedback.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
You know, we only meet once a month.
Well,
That's
just
a joke.
to consider, exactly, right, just consider and,
Yeah.
but I don't feel like it will take that long for me to process that.
Great. That tone didn't come off well. What I was intending was take your time. We got plenty of time. Okay, great. So then, in a normal month, what we would do now is hear from General Counsel's office on what from their 3-year review they'd like us to take a look at. In prepping with this meeting with Dan ahead of time, there's nothing that we need to look at this month, but we'll pick up there next month. And so we'll go then to item 5, which is to work through these topics submitted by board members. I thought we could start with our newest board member, Jim, and hear about school foundations.
That's great, Ben, to always have the rookie go first. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So hopefully this will be good information. I had my favorite number is 13, so I'm very happy to have it be. Nobody likes that number, so it's all my own. But except and I think Taylor Swift has it now too, or something. But so we had a preliminary meeting. Eve and I did with the Activities Beyond the Classroom group to talk about their foundation and how it works. And initially, when I first looked at this topic, I looked at there's really 2 ways to do this. You can have a fund in the accounting within the district that can serve as a foundation. And we're already a nonprofit, so people donating money could get the tax deduction. The other way is to have a separate entity with a separate tax ID number outside the school district to raise money. And we haven't really had, CPS is a long-established school district. We don't have our own foundation for CPS. Many school districts have their own foundation for the school district. One of the reasons for that is some of our schools have their own foundations. Walnut Hills, SCPA, West High all have their own foundations at a school level. So to some degree, I guess that's why this district-wide foundation hasn't been created. In talking with Activities Beyond the Classroom, they really have served historically in a way similar to how district-wide foundations have served other school districts. They just don't have the name Cincinnati Public School Foundation. So that was an interesting conversation about whether or not that would be an organization that could readjust itself to become the district foundation, because they serve in that capacity already, and their when they started up, they were sort of started up in that capacity a long time ago. So that's something to think about. The advantage to that is they're already an established foundation with a board, with processes and rules and a tax ID number and an audit, and they have a lawyer who helps them. So that's an existing foundation that could be renamed and just become our foundation rather than us having to start our own. No matter what we do, whether it's a small one in-house or an external one, we're going to have to be sure that we establish the mission of the foundation and that's in alignment with the district and the board and the administration. And if we get the mission established correctly, it should enable the fundraising efforts to not have to be approved each little initiative that the district makes. It could be, but we can establish a mission that's broad enough so that when there are fundraisers or fundraising activities that we'll know whether they're acceptable or not. We'll not necessarily have to micromanage the process, which could be helpful. So I am sort of in the document that I included is from the Ohio School Boards Association. I've been in touch with them, talked to some of their folks up there. This is a very well-established process. Many school districts have this. So I think what they lay out in this document is all stuff that we could easily follow and pay attention to. I am leaning more towards having an outside foundation with its own tax ID number and its own structure outside of the board, because I think the potential to raise bigger money is significant. I think there'll be maybe big donors, corporate donors that will feel better about donating money not into something that's within the district, it's separate. So that's why I'm kind of leaning that way and suggesting that might be a better, stronger way for us to go. But right now, I just wanted to get the conversation started, have you guys kind of get familiar with this and think about what we might do and might not do. I think the folks at the Activities Beyond the Classroom, we gave them a lot to think about, and they have to go back to their board to decide if they want to change how they operate as well. But so that's my update, and now I just open it up for questions and comments. And Eve was in the meeting with me. I don't know if you need to add. Okay. Pretty good for a rookie, right? Yes. Okay. So just by way of background, I served on the Finance and Audit Committee of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation for 7 years, about a decade ago. And when I worked at the University of Cincinnati, I was in charge of the University of Cincinnati College of Law Foundation. I managed that. So I've got some background in some of this area that might be helpful to us.
So thank you, Board Member Crossett, for bringing this to us. I definitely would need to take more time to learn about all of the intricacies of having a foundation. But I am curious to know, you spoke about leaning more towards having an outside foundation versus within the district. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what are those like pros and what are some of those challenges? And also what are those like parameters in place if it was, if we did choose the vein of an outside foundation, how would that protect us as a district?
Sure. On the inside, the district option, it could be done in the accounting system. It would be subject to all the same accounting rules that the district is currently subject to, and those monies would be designated. In other words, you couldn't use them for anything else other than what the donor designated them for. If it could be if it was a donation inside the district with no strings attached, then it would be up to the discretion of the board on how that money would get used. So I think either method could be equally effective in terms of the administration of it and the tax deductibility of the donors. I think the external model gives, they're probably equally protected and equally safe in how it would have to be cared for. I think the outside model just will encourage bigger donors. I think the big donors like to see an external group, a separate board, a separate audit, a separate tax ID number, just because I think that will give them maybe a little more confidence that the oversight of the donation will be a little more arm's length from the district. So I think that's really the advantage of having a separate one, the biggest advantage that I see.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you, Jim. I'll share for my part, and then we would love to hear from interim superintendent or from council's office or other admin folks. I have no questions or concerns about weather at all. All my questions are about what's next. You know, like, I think it's a great idea. I think after law school, my first job was working for the DC Public Schools in their central office, and they had a foundation, and so I do think it's a great thing for us to do. And I agree that I think you get bigger donations if it's not if it's separate. It's also been this just weird phenomenon for me. I feel like in any other context, getting a six-figure gift, you know, is a really big deal. And then suddenly when your budget is $600 million, you know, a six-figure gift is like rounding error, you know? And so there's something about like having it in a separate fund that I think feels like you can see it better, size it better, deploy it in a more meaningful way. So all that I think sounds great. And if I'm alone in my reaction to the math, I apologize. I was just interested in kind of where we go from here, you know, and is this like, if it's something that is standalone, what role is there in policy, if any, you know, or is this something that can continue to move forward outside this committee, or how can we help, I think is my question.
Yeah, I'm waiting to get some feedback from the activities beyond the classroom folks to see where they are. The advantage to that is if they're interested, the speed with which we could have a foundation would be a lot faster than trying to build one ourselves. So there's some advantage in that, but they would have to really restructure their mission and their scope and everything else. I know they're important to the district, but that's one idea. But I don't know if they're interested in that idea either. So they have to come back and they've got a board to deal with. So I'd kind of like to look at that option. And if that's not an option, then we would need to go build our own foundation. So I think in terms of next steps, maybe we're still in the conversation and discussion period. But once the ABC folks have some indication of what they might want to do, you can look at that as more of the conversation, and then as soon as that's cleared one way or the other, then we probably need some sort of decision by the board to say, let's go forward. By the board, whether they want an internal one or an external one, and then we'd have to put together probably some sort of team of people to get going. Does that sound kind of right, Dan? I didn't have my microphone on, didn't I? Did you get all that?
Anything from, you know, Shauna, Dan, or Stephanie, anything on the?
Yes, and I'm happy to have Dan and Stephanie chime back in, but I would definitely appreciate and love to have your support around this for a lot of different reasons, but I'll keep it to maybe 3 for right now. One, we have a strong partnership with Activities Beyond the Classroom, and I will go ahead and say unofficially, because this probably should be board to board, but I did have a conversation with Sally this week, and their board is all in and ready to morph into the Cincinnati Public School Foundation. 1, 2, having been a servant in both magnet and traditional neighborhood schools, I see the differences that go on in our district, that we've been working really hard to level the playing field, especially since the board created the equity policy, but there's still much more work to do. Thirdly, with the state of finances for public education, it's imperative that we begin to figure out how to provide things for schools that we have not been able to provide through the general fund, et cetera, et cetera.
I'll just add that I think the importance of a foundation goes not only to a really large gift, let's say, like Chair Lindy was describing, and that the district has benefited from in its past. I mean, we had the GE gift, I think, in the early 2000s, was a really like game-changing, district-changing gift to the district. But the importance of a foundation also goes to the really small fundraisers that happen at schools. Not every school has an alumni foundation, a booster club, a sophisticated sort of support network. And so if a group of preschool parents would like to host a car wash to raise money for, some class enrichment activities, having a partner that they could go to deposit those funds and then get those funds out. And I have to say, ABC is serving that role for us. And maybe it's not talked about very much, but I think serve for more. They have more than 100 funds that are just those kind of funds or foundations for small organizations, cheerleading teams, bands throughout the district, and this can be incredibly valuable for those small organizations as well.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great point and very, very helpful. So what I have as next steps is that there's some internal ABC conversations that are going to happen, the results of which will be communicated to Interim Superintendent Murphy, and there would, assuming that things move in the direction that they seem to be moving, there would at some point be a board vote to support, I guess, the emergence of a Cincinnati Foundation. Am I hearing the next steps right? Great. And so then I think from the committee's perspective, what I'm not hearing is that there are more things for the policy committee to do as it relates to this. And I'm happy to, but I just want to check. Nothing. Is there anything else that we need to do?
Not right now, but I think there might be some things that the policy committee will have to do after the board makes a decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah.
Okay. I do have a clarifying question, and I will begin with saying I think ABC is an amazing partner and so appreciative of all of the support and resources that they provide our students. Just a clarifying question about the foundation. So is ABC the only organization that has, discussed maybe interest in establishing a foundation for our students, or just trying to figure out just if there are other opportunities available as well?
I will say, and Dan will help me out based on what I know. Yes, I will say to you, Dan and I started conversations about this probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I know previous superintendents and boards have discussed this as well. So to the best of my knowledge, ABC is the only that has expressed interest.
Me too. There are other foundations that exist in the district, the Walnut Hills Alumni Foundation, the SCPA Foundation. I don't think this is a proposal that would replace those at all. Rather, I guess I was sort of starting on the other side. If a group was trying to start up a foundation, ABC or a school foundation, a district-wide foundation would be a great support for that. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else on CPS Foundation? Look forward to seeing where this goes. Happy to have us take it up again once we're on the other side of a few other things. And thanks also just Jim for bringing this and the idea. And thanks everybody for the conversations you've been having. Okay. So we're moving right along. We're on item 5B on our agenda. And Kendra, I did not pregame this at all with you, but would you like to say a few words about why you wanted to put this on here?
Absolutely. So, and I'll be brief. And I'll also have Dan chime in as well if he feels the need to. But just recognizing that we've had several changes, obviously, within our district in terms of administration. And so we have had to have a interim superintendent, as well as with the interim superintendent, we've also had to have interim administration. And so individuals are filling the capacity or the vacancies of principal roles or of different responsibilities within your team. And so wanting to make sure that we're being proactive, right? In terms of once we do identify what next steps are for actual superintendent, or when we identify who our next superintendent will be, what that looks like in terms of individuals being able to return back to their respective positions, in terms of how long they would serve in these interim spaces, what does the salary and benefits look like, and then also making sure that we are just being very mindful about having the conversations, just to have that security in place where everyone feels comfortable to know that, yes, I am serving in this capacity now, but what does that look like when we shift to, identifying who the next superintendent will be. And so I just think that it just puts language in place. And I think that it also helps to provide clear next steps for everyone that, is serving in the interim capacity. Dan, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Nothing to add. I think, when we have occasion when a principal wins a lottery and moves on to Hawaii, and we have a occasion to put in an interim person in that kind of a situation. And so I think when we talked, I think the idea was to try to have some standard processes that we would follow in that kind of a situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone has a question or feedback, definitely open to that. Just wanted to, again, to Dan's point, make sure that we have some procedures in place to address, something that is very real for us at this present moment.
Jim?
So on the interim positions below the interim superintendent, are there certain positions that have to remain interim during this time period?
Not necessarily. It's just there are currently with an interim superintendent, there are some interim administrators, and then because they are in interim, there are also some interim principals who are stepping up at a time when those principals are serving as. So there are. It's been kind of a cascade of interim positions right now.
So if somebody is an interim principal, that is, they're just sort of volunteering for that spot. They might not necessarily want to retain it over time, and that's why they have the title interim.
That and in general, our LSTMCs have been highly involved in selecting a principal when we have a last minute occasion to put somebody in place where the LSTMC hasn't necessarily had that opportunity. We would generally put an interim tag on them.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And a lot of times we have interim principals because something happens late spring. In order to have someone in place for the school, we put an interim in place. In the past, we have had opportunities for the LSTMC to say one of two things. We would like to make our interim principal our principal, or we would like to go through a process. So we have done both of those.
Perfect. And
Thank
then
you.
also just in conversation is around, what that time frame would look like. So if the board decided that, anyone serving in this capacity, if we wanted to extend that tenure for an additional year, that could be voted upon and approved by the board. But again, just making sure that there are clear guidelines. And then I think also that language around like the LSDMC can be incorporated into that to make it more specific.
So the LSTMC guidelines handbook currently says the LSTMC makes the selection. So broadly around what the board would like to do with interim in general, clearly is up to you. But for principal, what we usually are governed by is those LSTMCs.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so, yes, principals are included in this, but again, based off of the scope of where we are now with obviously an interim superintendent as well as a interim administration. I think that there should be some type of framework so that we're all clear about what that looks like. And so if there's additional information to incorporate, I am definitely open to that, but I wanted to make sure that we started the conversation around it.
Thank you. It sounds like a great idea. So is, certainly can invite other questions or comments as we go, but I'm trying to think about where we would go next. It sounds like idea would be council's office would draft something. We could look at it at an upcoming policy committee meeting and kick it around, make some changes, decide it's great, send it onto the full board.
Correct.
Sound right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Great. So we're going to say, just given the number of interims that we have at the moment, this feels like something to do sooner rather than later. Does that feel right to you too? So like, is this doable in the October meeting,
Yes.
Dan? Okay. Would we be cheating if we said this is in that first section about, proposed topics? And it's not, I guess we're not reviewing existing policies, but we'll fit it in there somewhere.
Yeah, and just to add, so all our interim employees are under a contract as well. So it's not like I think it's a good idea policy wise to have a standard way of doing this, but we do have contracts in place for our interim folks.
I was thinking about that a little bit too, because I remember this before when it was interim superintendent Lamont, we also had a set of interim. I was also thinking Dan may win the lottery one year and Stephanie may win the lottery one year. And we may have a general counsel's office that doesn't have those kinds of and so like to have a policy like this, I think for the future,
Really good.
and for the present, but I think there are a lot of reasons why it's a great idea. Yeah. Any other comments on item 5B? Hearing none, we're going to move to 5C. Okay. So this one was for me, and you do have an attachment here that has two parts to it. This was also posted on Board Docs on Wednesday. You have it in the packet. Looks like this. The first page is our current policy on evaluation of the superintendent. And the page that follows and the page after that were the ideas I had. We don't have to use my ideas. That's why I wanted to bring it to the group. But I thought it could be helpful to share kind of three motivations that I had for wanting to our committee to take up this particular policy. And if you've read them already, they'll jump right out to you. But if you haven't yet, like as you go through it, hopefully it'll make some sense. So it's about the first point is about timing. There is this March 1st date in the current policy. And as I understand this, I'm going to ask, counsel's office to correct me if I'm wrong. There is a part of Ohio Revised Code that says if you're in the last year of a superintendent's contract and you're going to non-renew that superintendent, you need to give that superintendent notice by March 1st. Is that my
Ohio Revised Code 3319.01.
And did I say it right?
You said it correctly.
Okay. So I think over time that, like when I joined the board, that had become, we have to do the evaluation before March 1st every year. And that's not what the state law says. And when you do an evaluation before March 1st, it creates some really wacky conditions. Namely, that you're in the middle of a school year that's not over yet. And so you have no information on how students did academically over the full course of the academic year if you're trying to do an evaluation in January and February to hit a March 1 deadline. And when I joined the board, that's what we did. And I don't think I ascribe no bad motivations to that. It's literally what our policy said. And so this seems to me that somehow over time, the understanding of what the March 1st date meant shifted. And one of the big motivations that I have in trying to revisit this policy is to create a timeline that, yes, absolutely follows state law because we have to, and also just has more coherence to it, so that when we're trying to give a superintendent feedback on how did they do this year, we can look at how kids did, and we can have results from the full scope of the academic year. So you'll see that in the version that I put together. The second thing is about, separate from timing, is about publicness and transparency. So the other thing that the proposal has in there is that every year the board needs to say in public what the goals are that the superintendent is going to be held accountable for before you get too far into the current school year. And part of the reason I think that matters, I think that's good democratic accountability for board members. I think we should have to be public about what we're going to hold the superintendent accountable for. And I think when you have to do that in public and vote in public, I think it creates real clarity for the board, for the superintendent, for the public about what is the most important set of things this person's on the hook for. So that's the whole idea with the transparency, with the publicness of the votes on these things. Doesn't mean the board can't still talk about the evaluation in executive session. Doesn't mean the board can't do a lot of the determining of what those goals will be in executive session. All those things, absolutely. Doesn't mean the board can't give feedback to the superintendent in executive session, but it means that every year, before you get too far into the school year, my proposal would be that we vote on what we're going to hold the superintendent accountable for. So first piece was about timing. Second piece was about a public piece and a transparency piece. And the third is being pretty explicit about the role that student outcomes should play in the overall evaluation. So that the lion's share of what the superintendent is being held accountable for is whether or not we're seeing improvements for children. Doesn't mean it's the only thing, but I do believe it should be the most important thing. I don't think that should actually be a close question. And so I think that, I've been on the board for about 5 years. And I think I've seen moments where we've done this really well. And I've seen moments where I think we've missed the mark on this. And similar to, I was just thinking about this in terms of Kendra's point about an interim superintendent policy. I feel like by getting some of these things in policy, we could not just do good now, but also set up a future where this becomes part of how the CPS board sets up an evaluation for its superintendent. So there's more in here. Like I'm honestly not, I'm less tied to the specifics of how we would advance these three things. But what I'd like to advocate that we find a way to do somehow is address the timing in policy, so that it reflects a full academic year. Somehow like get more of what the superintendent's going to be held accountable for voted on in public in advance of the school year. So we're not deciding at the end what the person's being evaluated for after the year's over. And then the last thing to find a way to make sure that it's going to have most of its emphasis be on how children are doing. So we welcome feedback. I don't know how. My hunch is this might take more than one policy committee meeting, and so we can get as far or not as far as we need to today. But I wanted to get the committee's feedback. Yeah, Kendra.
To your point about having that public conversation about what the superintendent will be evaluated on, would that be a working conversation and dialogue with the superintendent as well as the board on establishing these goals and what those measurements would look like?
I think my sense is it would have to be. Is that
Yeah,
similar to what you were
yeah.
thinking? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim.
Are you saying it's a mutual agreement on what those goals are?
Yes,
Yeah.
so
I agree.
not just one
Yep.
directional for the board to say, this is what we're expecting of you, but for there to be that bilateral conversation about, hey, these are the goals that we're equally agreeing upon, and this is how we will go about evaluating that.
I think I'm saying the same thing you two are, but I would like to check. I'm not proposing we give the superintendent a veto right.
Okay.
Like where if the superintendent does it at the end of the day, if the board really believes the goal should be X and the superintendent disagrees, the board's in charge. And I think the board, I don't think the superintendent gets a veto right, but I think that any good board should be incredibly interested in what the
Yes.
superintendent thinks is most important, is feasible, all those things, and really should be a product of dialogue.
Yes.
But I was not going so far as to have a veto right.
Well, so I understand setting that precedence, but I think anytime we're establishing any type of goal, I do believe that there needs to be conversation about how whoever is in a position, how I will be able to, or that person will be able to operate and work and navigate, I guess, uphold that goal. So understanding what that expectation is. So it would be important to have that feedback from whoever is the superintendent. And then the board can very well say, okay, but these are the expectations, but I think it does need to be that conversational piece in place.
Yep.
Mhm.
I agree.
I think the goals themselves or the targets that are made need to be in sync with the strategic plan. And I also think that it might be good to have some goals that are beyond 1 year, like maybe 3 years, because
Yeah.
the strategic plan is long-term. And that way, if, say, the trend of progress is in the right direction, but maybe it's not quite as good this year as it might be next year, that there's some ability, because there's a lot of components in
Yeah.
achieving these goals that are, hard to, there can be things that affect those results that are outside the control of the superintendent.
Mhm.
So.
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder if there's a way to get some language that says both is really clear that that's what we want to happen
Mhm.
and allows for years where like there's a new superintendent who comes in. Like there might need to be a new strategic plan. And so you might need to have a year while you build some of but it should be in pursuit of exactly what I think you're describing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Great. So I'd also like to ask, in a second, I would really interested in what Interim Superintendent Murphy and Council's office might have to share, if anything. But if Kendra or Jim, if you did have a chance to read any of what I wrote, was there anything else that jumped out as like something we should talk about? I think we'll talk about this again next month, but just in this meeting.
Yeah, I don't know, the timing, I mean, if you get into a regular rhythm with a superintendent that's in office for a while, I don't know, it could be before October. I mean, the school year starts in August.
Yeah.
So that timing could be maybe a little more around the school year.
I think that's great. Does it say
Did it say
or
October?
no later than?
By the end of the first week in October each year.
So yeah, so could people
Could happen
do it
earlier,
if you
yeah.
want. Yeah.
Um,
I'll tell you, I think that the end of the first week in October came from somewhere. It wasn't arbitrary, but typically as long as I can remember, the final state data on the previous school year comes out like the second-ish week in September. And so like that would give the board and the superintendent, like a 3 weeks or so to look at it, think about it, talk about it in some executive sessions, figure out like what makes sense. Because I think I've certainly, not just in this role, but at other jobs, like it's always weird when you're trying to set a goal for next year, but you don't only have the results of the year that you're in. I hate that feeling because it's just hard to feel like it has any meaning to it. So that was the thought.
that makes sense.
Was there anything else people read? If you're not, that's fine. We can also talk about it again next time.
Does interim superintendent Murphy have any thoughts about this?
Of course. So just a few, maybe 3 things to consider. One, I do appreciate what Board Member Mapp is saying, and just to model the structure of the district. All of the administrative goals are done collaboratively with your supervisor. So no other supervisor hands an employee their goal. It's done collaboratively. I would appreciate that consideration. I do agree the goals should be aligned to the strategic plan and the goals and the vision of the district of the board. Absolutely. Timing wise, I appreciate that language around October because for example, administrator goals are due today. So my team's goals would be due to me today. Those should all cascade. And so after that would give me or the superintendent an opportunity to review those goals of the team because they should have reviewed the goals of their direct reports, et cetera. That then would seem fair to me.
Can I ask, interim superintendent, would you change the date and make it later or earlier? Because it strike, or maybe I just
For superintendent or for the
I was thinking
district
for this
admin-
policy. Yeah, do you, because the end of October was a I thought it made sense, but you may have good reasons to want to push it even earlier, later, or
I don't have a reason to want to push it later because, the work is being done now.
Now,
And so
right?
we
Yeah.
should be clear about what
Yeah.
we're focusing on. But and so conversation about what that should be along the way, leading to at least mid-October at the latest, I would say.
Yeah.
Again, every other administrator goal is due today, so the 23rd, not quite the end of the month. That would give me about a week to review those with the team and then really formulate ones that will be solid between superintendent and board.
It's great.
I don't know if it's in here and it probably is, but was there conversation around having interim discussion about how the superintendent is tracking in terms of reaching those goals?
That is not something that's in the draft that I wrote. But I think, can you actually say more about what you're thinking?
Well, yes, absolutely, because if we're talking about having the expectation of meeting a goal, and we know that we don't want to get to the end and say, well, you haven't met your
Surprise,
goals.
yeah.
Yes, we don't want to have any surprises. So how are we giving that consistent feedback along the way to say, these are areas that, you know, you are doing really well in, and or these are potential areas that can stand to have some improvement, and having conversations specifically about what that improvement looks like.
So I can imagine. Oh, sorry, Jim. Yeah.
Maybe interim superintendent Murphy would want to talk about the dashboard idea that's out there.
So you have already given me permission to revamp what reporting on the strategic plan, goals, and guardrails looks like. You've already given us permission to make some shifts so that there is a focus on Wednesdays during CAL. I am ready to share how we are tracking that work, which drives my work. So whenever it's your pleasure, if it's at the next CAL, if that's acceptable, I'd be ready to share how we're working on that.
Thank you. Did that address the piece you were asking about?
Yeah, I also made a suggestion. The Internal Audit Committee has these dashboards that once they're up and built, you can look at them anytime. You don't even have to wait for a once-a-month meeting. But it also depends on how frequently the administration can update the data for those dashboards. But it could be a model for getting this interim feedback to make sure there's no surprises, even more so in real time than necessarily just at a CAL meeting. I don't know if that would be helpful for everybody, but
I would be happy and can easily share the link to this document that we've created. I would like to walk through it with you initially, but I'm very happy. And whenever a member wants to look at where are we, what are we doing, what are the strategies around the goals specifically, what are the measures, and where are we with progress, I'm excited to share that with you.
I can appreciate both, but I do think that it would be advantageous to still have that specifically outlined in the policy, to know that there will be interim conversations around reaching that target goal.
yes, I agree that the dashboards are not they're the starting point of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then I will, I'm just watching our clock a little bit. I was hoping we could start section 6 because we got to do uniforms, dress and grooming, wellness, AI by 10:35, which is 3 minutes from now. So we're doing fine, but I'm probably going to bring this to a decision close. I'm just going to get some next steps as I hear them. I might ask for council office's help. I'm sure you can write something better than I wrote. And so as you look through this, if you see ways to, if I did something silly that is going to get us in trouble somehow, can clean that up. I also, just the things I heard from board members, if you could take a swing at some language that gets at this idea of jointly determined goals, that I think is short of a veto, right? But all the way up to that line. And then also that in a world where things are functioning the way they should be, the goals that are part of this evaluation are in sync with a strategic plan and part of a multi-year runway. Is that right, Jim? Okay. If you could also put something in there that says that the board and the superintendent should be having interim discussions about performance on this evaluation over the course of the year. This was the no surprises point. Does that get it, what you were saying?
Mhm.
Okay. And then those are the only like edits or adds I have. Did I miss anything? Okay. And then I'm interested, like, I'll put this on like the stuff we're continuing in next month's. And I would just add, like, we didn't talk about today, but I would love to talk about next time is the section on scoring and infrequent scenarios. So if people could just read the last page for our next meeting next month, and we could talk about that next time. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lundy, could I also ask policy committee's consideration around, we now have a couple of people at least who have kind of a dual reporting structure with the superintendent and with the board. So what will that look like for that individual, those individuals?
This would be for like general counsel. and
Yes.
For treasurer or
Not treasurer for me, but the communications person at this point,
Yes. Who is that presently?
Catherine.
Catherine.
Catherine
reporting
Robinson.
To the board.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, what about Dan?
Yeah, I think that's. I think this is a really good topic, and I think it's likely worthy of its own policy. Or like I think it might be what I'm inclined to do is, yes, let's talk about this. It
Yeah.
might be a standalone topic.
So for example, Dan will be sharing his goals with me today, but it shouldn't just be my approval, I assume, then, of those goals.
Yeah, that's a good thing for us to. Yeah. Mhm.
Appreciate the timing issue and the public nature, these changes you've made. The only thing, and far be it from me.
The suggestions I've made, no changes.
I love them. Those suggestions are great. I don't want to lose though what we have, which is that first of all, this October only works if somebody's already been in office. Or it has something to do with the tenure. You can't have somebody get evaluated for the year if they indeed started in August. But I think it's important that we keep somewhere in there, not just the collaborative thing that the superintendent has mentioned, but there is an important aspect to a superintendent establishing the annual goals based on what the board wants and based on the board's vision and mission, but you want your chief executive to be the one to establish the annual goals for that year, rather than it necessarily being the board. So there's a sentence here, I think we dropped this sentence that lost a little bit of that collaboration, but I think we lost a sentence where it really is the superintendent's job to say what the goals are that year.
I think that's great.
What goals are.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering some language I've that's been helpful in the past, or things like the because I think we're talking about the same thing, but I'd like to check. The superintendent would propose a set of goals, the board ratifies it. And so the board, they're done once the board has reviewed them, talked about them, and in public voted to approve them for that year. Yeah, I was saying the same thing. Yeah. That's great. Okay, so I could talk about superintendent eval all day long, but it is not the only thing we have on our agenda. We also have school uniforms. And so for this, I think I'll hand it over to counsel's office. Yes.
Sure. No change. We haven't made any changes. I don't think there were any changes requested on school uniforms. The dress and grooming policy, we added the line that is already in school uniforms policy stating that students shall not suffer an academic penalty, i.e. a removal penalty for a violation of this policy. Welcome the continued conversation about these two policies.
Thank you. Any further reflections from committee members? Ms. Mack.
Yes, so I did not have any concern with the school uniform policy, but I did have concerns about the dress and grooming. And so we talked a lot in detail at the last committee meeting just around ensuring that our students are able to express themselves freely, but at the same time, having some boundaries in place in terms of what that looks like and having some modesty in place. And so I did see in the wellness policy that was drafted, there was language around embracing students from different cultures, body types, and abilities in a meaningful and non-judgmental way. I think that that can be helpful to be included in the policy, while at the same time making sure that we are having some specificity around what's not acceptable dress or attire, such as we talked about, showing midriff or explicitly showing different body parts that can serve as a distraction and also create some issues around safety. So I would like to see that. That's just my own personal thoughts, and you all can weigh in as well. But having more clarity in the policy around that. And then the other thing that I noticed is that it doesn't necessarily show alignment with the policy. When we look down at C, it says request that staff members to demonstrate by example and precept wholesome attitudes toward neatness, cleanliness, propriety, modesty, and good sense in attire and appearance. I don't think, so we're holding our staff to a standard and expectation that I don't think is necessarily conveyed with our student dress and attire, if that makes sense. So if we could create some alignment there, that would be the recommendations that I have to further add some more detail and clarity with this policy. And then I did have one question around our dress and grooming policy. Have we done or conducted an equity audit to see across our schools how different schools are experiencing concerns as it pertains to appropriate attire?
I would say the last time we maybe did an equity audit in this area must have been 2019. So not in recent time that I'm aware of.
Okay, and just curious to know, what would it take? Would it take a lot to maybe consider that?
So
recently?
no problem. The deputy and Monisha House, the director of our positive school culture, they're going to be doing culture walks in schools.
Mhm.
And so I can talk with them about adding this layer.
Okay. That's all that I have.
Thank you. I keep going back and forth, first names, last names. I'll
Yeah.
probably just bounce around. Mr. Cressett.
Yes, I support everything that board member Mapp suggested. Sound like good ideas. And thank you for your thoughtfulness around that.
Thank you.
Same. So that this leads to some next steps for council's office to bring back next month. And
Mhm.
that's okay, great. Phyllis, I'm sort of keeping track of things that I know we need to have on next month's agenda. Are you also keeping track of the things we've got? Great. And so we'll put that in for next. Awesome. Thank you. So that took us through 6A. Did it also take us through 6B?
Mhm.
So now we're on 6C.
Mhm.
All right. Wellness.
So the wellness, the updated policy, which was discussed at length by Jessica Shelley, our food services director, and Chris Burkhart last month, the actual changes that they're proposing in terms of a red line were added to your packet. They were all discussed at last meeting. The request would be to move this forward for full board approval. Welcome your questions.
Jim, Kendra? Good. Yeah.
So, okay, I do understand from Ms. Shelley's presentation, the urgency to move this forward for board approval, because I definitely know that it impacts some ratings that we could obviously obtain. And I am in total agreement with that. My concern still stands as it pertains to that overall social and emotional piece. I mean, we're actively working on a wellness policy, and that's a piece that is very much negated to a large degree. It's mentioned, but it doesn't create that, again, that succinct alignment. if we're talking about wellness, we want to include every aspect of wellness. And so I was wondering, if we can incorporate that, maybe an additional goal to talk about mental health and social and emotional wellness, and specifically, outlining what that could entail, or as it relates to state and national standards, and how we are actively honoring it in the district already, because I know we are already doing great work. And thank you, Interim Superintendent Murphy, for allowing your team to explain and to share all of the great things that are doing around social and emotional wellness. So I would like to see that, fleshed out more. I won't get into where I think additional language can be incorporated. Maybe we can do that offline if that's okay, to honor everyone's time. But I know that Miss Manisha House is doing a lot of work, and so maybe that can be incorporated as well. I do have a question around the urgency. Is there a way that, because I don't want to delay the work that is being done by Ms. Shelley, so I understand wanting to move this forward, but I would rather be very intentional about having a full wellness policy to present versus trying to piecemeal it, if that makes sense.
In my understanding and speaking with Chief Burkhart last week or last month, I don't think there's urgency in getting this passed this month.
Okay.
What I don't know, and I'd have to follow up with Jessica Shelley about, is whether adding a goal related to mental health, how that part of this, if you remember, related to their WellStat score, and making sure we're not sort of leaving points off the table. And I don't know how that fits into the WellStat score, and I'd want to confer with her about that.
Okay.
So if you'll allow, I can take it back to her,
Mhm.
express your interest
Yeah.
in adding
Yeah.
a goal, I guess, for social emotional wellness,
Yeah.
and whether or not that fits, how that would align
Yeah.
with sort of WellStat.
And because my thinking around it is, I don't know if it necessarily needs to fit within that score, as long as we have these two components, but that's an additional piece to honor what we're actively doing in the district and upholding the, the guardrails that we have in place. And so I'm believing it can be a both and.
I'll follow up with her.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate that that's going to be important. My understanding with the WellSet program is you have to say what you're going to do, and then you get evaluated on whether you're doing it or not. So there's an opportunity here. If we're doing a lot of great things with social and emotional wellness in the district now, we probably have an opportunity to, if it's part of WellSet, to have it be that we're automatically in compliance, or, something like that. Make sense? Kendra? Yep. Okay.
Great.
Anything else on item 6C, wellness? Okay, so before we go to 6D, I'm going to say a piece here about hearing of the public. If you're watching online, because Rob taught me this at the last meeting. Thank you, Rob. If you're watching and would like to, Rob, what will you tell people the button to push?
Yeah, if you'd like to speak during the speaking in public, please click the hand icon. We'll ask you for your name and association for the district, and we'll invite you to come in to speak during that time.
Great. Already an improvement over last month for me. So thank you. Okay. Great. So artificial intelligence. So Jeremy, thanks for being here, and thanks for being here for so much of the meeting that wasn't about artificial intelligence. But I had asked, Kareem had some initial concerns at the meeting. I had asked her to send an email to Dan and Jeremy and me, just with a list of the concerns, because I caught some of them live in the board meeting, but not all of them in the board meeting. And the piece I wanted to make sure we could do is just go through those one at a time and just hear what you all thought about it, and whether or if at all we should make any changes. If there are other things that other board members have or other administrators have that they'd also like to bring up around the AI policy, we can certainly do that also. But I thought maybe I'd love to start with what Board Member Moffett had shared. Do you have that email, Jeremy? Is it helpful? Or I should, interim superintendent, if you would rather share, or if Jeremy's the right person. Stephanie.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Go for
But yes, as you had shared, we've been working with our IT and Jeremy in regards to the draft of the artificial intelligence policy, and we had gotten some, like you said, follow-up from the last board meeting, specifically from Dr. Moffitt and some of the things that she wanted integrated. So I think as it relates to section A, where she was asking for there to be a reference to kind of our disability policies, anti-bullying, and our code of conduct. So you'll see in the red line that we have here that we've attempted to kind of integrate some language, specifically calling out those policies, as well as incorporating some key language to make sure that it's more clear. I think the original draft we had was more general. It wasn't that it was missing, but we have taken a step to make some of the information more explicit as it relates to those areas. I'll let Jeremy talk about section B. As it relates to C, where she was asking about teacher usage and considerations, I did just want to call out that, again, the original policy was for students and staff. So there is language in here that provides some direction to our teachers and so forth, and how they integrate AI. So like bullet 1 and 4 on the first page are specifically referencing how staff should incorporate it and what type of thing they should be considered when they're including that in their coursework. And then as it relates to part of D, again, when it's talking about the parent and student voices, Jeremy's going to address that. But again, in reference to the code of conduct, again, we've incorporated some language in here, and specifically some of the language that's used in here is already mentioned in our code of conduct. So our AI policy would fall directly in line with that. So specifically, when it comes to like academic dishonesty and false identification, those are already category 1 offenses. So this would just be another method, I guess, of how students should be reflective in how they manage their behavior in that way. But again, we've specifically added some of that language to here. And then again, the question around our ESL families. There's language in here as it relates to bias and equity, and making sure that any type of use of AI is implemented in that way. So again, so that was our first attempt at doing that. And then Jeremy, anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I think one part, especially around the teacher voice in section B that you pointed out, it's worth recapping some of what the AI task force work was in terms of there were 20 overall members within that task force. 13 of those members were teachers or teacher representatives. So I think at that point, they really helped develop the framework which led into this policy. So I think teacher voice was captured at that point. And as we talked about on Monday and before, this is an emerging technology. There's going to be continuous revisions that we'll need to go through and continue to get additional voices added. So from there, I think that there is still the opportunity from the last policy committee meeting to the board. We resent the final wording and everything that we had presented to both the AI task force as well as the CFT representatives for feedback, and we did not get anything in terms of changes back at that time. But I think, as the CFT is running it,
It's an AI task, we have a mini grant.
Is running their AI evaluation and mini grant program. I think as they continue that work, there's definitely opportunities to include additional voice from there in the policy going forward. From parent and student voice has not been included within the work so far around establishing this framework and initial policy. We really viewed this as creating the first guardrails around the general ethical use and getting us some controls in place around, again, an emerging technology that we know teachers are starting to use, students are starting to use. And really, as we develop the guidelines and the practical implementation around the policy, as well as its revisions, is where we envision capturing much more of that parent and student voice in the specifics of like, what do we use, how do we use it, and not just around the overall ethics of it.
That's great. Thank you. Jim or Kendra, any comments, questions?
Just one question. In this first bullet point, it says AI should be used to support and augment work and not replace human staff. Our budgets are tight, and if we get and AI is software. Software has historically been automating lots of things for the last 20, 30 years. And I'm not thinking so much about the classroom or the educational delivery of education, but if there's something in the back office that AI makes efficient, does this mean that we can't take advantage of that efficiency to generate cost savings when we need to be looking at cost savings? Is that what that means, Dan? Or, I mean, I just don't want us to be hemmed in necessarily. And it's more like the back office or, something to do with maybe the HR department can get more efficient. Some in those areas is what I'm thinking about.
I mean, I think again, as Jeremy has stated, I think the intention of the policy right now is to put guardrails in place. And again, I think those would be areas where it would be emerging. So I think it would be a situation if we found a department that was utilizing AI in a way that it was more efficient, that maybe a human wasn't there, then that would be a conversation again that would be led by, the superintendent or from an HR recommendation, in collaboration with the unions, of course, because you're talking about people at that point. But I think some of those things would be emerging. But I think in some ways, I think board member Lindy had used a good example of how sometimes with certain AI, you can put information in, but if it's not reviewed by a human, it can come out, it could sound great. The word and the key phrases can be there, but it can actually be incorrect. So I think as this is kind of kind of emerging thing in some instances, which primarily I think we're talking about in that realm, it still does require the judgment, of a human to make sure, especially when we're talking about the education of our children, to make sure that it's accurate and adequate. But I don't think this would hinder us from doing that. I think that would be an area that, again, if revision was necessary, it could easily be done.
And I would suggest we have a number of open positions in the district all the time, and it could be just repurposing somebody, not necessarily somebody losing their job. And but I also appreciate your comment that we should definitely not have board member Lindy touching AI.
It's gone, it's like I'm 1 for 3 on my AI efforts. Julie, did you have something? I know you're here, and Kareem had mentioned your work in her email.
Top of that page, second page, it says AI should be used in a manner that increases accessibility and provides broader pathways for learning materials for people with disabilities. I don't think it should be limited just to people with disabilities, because what about all of our students and families who have language barriers? And so this may be something that it can be used appropriately when they are making accommodations for language barriers, and those students aren't necessarily with a disability.
So, I mean, I feels like a really easy and good add to say and/or language barriers at the end of that sentence, right? I hear that right. And I think as a translating tool, that sounds really helpful. So I think just as looking at time and also I really appreciate we can go back and forth on small changes forever. I think this is really good. My recommendation would be we voted out a committee and recommend it for passage at the next board meeting. But I would like to see if Kendra and Jim feel the same way. And if it needs more time, it needs more time.
And with the grant that we have, we're doing training for teachers that will be optional. And that will be by, people who are highly qualified to do that. We're also looking at possibly another grant that can enhance the grant that we have, because this is a really fast moving area. I know the district has limited resources for that professional development. So I think what we're doing will still meet within the guidelines of this policy.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. If we're talking about in here doing additional audits as it continues to emerge, are we able to put that language in here just so people know that we are constantly, being attuned to how this technology is evolving and that we are being mindful of how, like, the usage of it? If we can incorporate just language around, we would continue to do additional audits regularly.
I would see no problem with that.
Okay.
So with that last ad, thank you. I think that's a good one. We can put this on the board agenda for approval at the next board meeting, which is a week from Monday. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to make it, everybody. Rob, how many folks do we have online for hearing of the public? Zero. How many people in the room do we have? We have two. Want to start with our gentleman in the back? Thank you for coming. We'll get your mic. And Rob, how long would folks usually have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I'm Matthew Dolan. I'm a parent of two students at Data Montessori. One of them is in the multiple disabilities classroom there. And I'm here today to ask that the district's transportation policy on siblings riding together or the segregation of special needs students from the general population of other students be discontinued or reevaluated so that siblings can ride on the same bus together. There are multiple families in our school alone that have a similar issue. Supposed to be here at 9 this morning, but unfortunately, because of the transportation issues that we are still remain to have, I couldn't get here until 9:30 or after 9:30 because my son's bus didn't get there until 9:30. So there's some deficits that are happening between the special needs transportation. And I know that the district as a whole has been having difficulty with transportation, but I feel that it's disingenuous to separate the special needs kids from the general population to be delivered all on one bus. And sometimes on a bus that cannot meet the needs of the individuals on that bus. There are a lot of contractors or bus providers in the CPS district that do not provide air conditioning. My son needs air conditioning. It is written into his IEP. And in the case of like this past summer, where we had multiple days where the heat index was well above 100 degrees, and you're riding in a tin can at the height of the day when it's the hottest part of the day, those things can be dangerous. And I'd like to see that the position is reevaluated, maybe an exception made for siblings of students who have special needs so that they can ride together, especially if they're going to the same campus. And I feel that it's sorry. There's a sense of othering that happens. And my son, it doesn't matter to him. My youngest son, I don't like the fact that I'm seeing his older brother being made out to be an other and why they can't ride the same bus together. That categorization and separation of peoples is unacceptable in this day and age.
You're at time.
Thank you very, very much. I'm wondering too, if we can make this a part of the transportation conversation that we have coming up in the future meeting. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Julie.
I just have a couple of comments. Number one is when you were talking about the interim administration, this process needs to be aligned so that it does not go through from one cycle to a next and overloads when things can happen. Because within the district, when principals are selected, there is a cycle and there's a time frame for that to happen. And if we are talking about anything with the senior leadership and those interim positions, and they have rights to return to their previous position because they've stepped up to help the district, then they should have the respect that that's done within the time frame. The interim should not last more than one cycle. So to carry an interim over from one cycle into the next hiring cycle, I don't think is effective or productive for our district. We've had 4 superintendents since COVID, and the employees in this district need stability, and that includes just not for the senior leadership, but it's for every principal, every teacher, every other employee, every school. We need stability. Every superintendent coming in here has spent money on their own pet projects, which has now put us in arrears on our budget. And we have to have this stability in order to move forward. And like I said at the last school board meeting, I've been out in the public. at a lot of community meetings. And the one thing that I keep hearing from people who've been involved with our district and who had kids in our district and who have worked for our district, the one thing they all say is they want a superintendent who's homegrown. And that's the term they're using. They want somebody from within our city. My doctor even said to me, what's the matter? Aren't there smart people in Cincinnati? Why would they go outside of Cincinnati? And if you look historically across all of the superintendents in my lifetime, the ones who have been homegrown, who are from Cincinnati, who have come up through our system are the ones who are the most successful. And so I think that we need to be making a decision soon so people know do I want to stay working in this district or not? And that is harming our leadership of all of our buildings. And so the sooner you all can make a decision, I think the better that will be. I also want to say that I agree with Mr. Crossett that we have to have realistic goals. The measurements for performances should be over a period of time because scores do ebb and flow. They ebb and flow from year to year based on those one-day test scores. Every kid will pass in the 4th grade, and then in the 5th grade, they all drop. And then in the 6th grade, they all go up. So test scores ebb and flow. But what we need to be measuring is over a trajectory. Is it moving in the right direction? Over time, are we increasing? But in order for some of these scores, the board must provide the funding for schools to be successful. That's with our staffing, making sure we're not having arbitrary cutbacks just to balance our budgets. Because some of these cutbacks can have harm for students learning. For example, we cut back math specialists, reading specialists, some of the ESP supports. We need stability of leadership so people know what is it that they're trying to work on, because as we have new leadership, the way that people are getting to those goals changes. But we also have to make sure that our schools have the resources, that they have good curriculum, that they have the tools and the resources they need to do the job for the students to be successful. So I think that we have had your 5 years, like Ben, you said you've been on the board for 5 years. We've had 4 superintendents since you've been on the board. And that is causing a problem. We need to have And we also have to think about all of the consequences of COVID. Some of those consequences are still impacting students, especially teenage girls, with their mental health. There's new studies out about that. And so we have to really start thinking, do we have the people in place to make sure our students are going to be successful for life? So I would just like to say those different comments. And there was one other thing I wanted to say, but I guess that's it for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other other business before we close? Thanks, everybody. We will.
I did have one thing. I'm sorry, Board
Yes,
Member
ma'am.
Lundy.
No, it's all right.
In regards to, we just had one policy that we just needed approval to move forward on the Title IX policy. Just as a matter of being correct, we currently have the Chief of Staff listed as the Title IX coordinator, and so we're just moving to change that to Chief of Schools since we no longer have that position.
Any concerns?
I don't have chief of schools either.
What is it? What's that? Oh, I guess
We have a
deputy.
separate
Deputy,
deputy.
yes.
Any
Yes.
concerns from Kendra or Jim if we make the change to reflect the current title? Okay, have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.
Oh,
Thanks.
Mr. Lindy, well, I can ask you something. I think I probably should ask for the record, though.
Yeah. Sorry.
clarity, I
Are we-
apologize.
Are we off? Nope. Okay.
This just is
We're
going,
still in session, everybody. We got,
I'm sorry.
hey, everybody, just called to order. We got one last thing from our interim superintendent, and I promise we'll,
Just
Yeah.
seeking clarity, going back to the foundation concept.
yes.
Is this something that can be discussed at the board level next time? Because in order for us to move forward, the piece we're waiting for is for our board to say you can move forward in the work.
So that,
At the foundation?
Yes.
Yeah, it needs to be at a board meeting next.
Yes, I'm hoping.
sorry, I thought when we talked about it before, we were waiting from ABC to hear something. Is that not accurate?
It'll be at the board. it's board level.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
different things. So I'm happy to do any. I'm hearing different things.
It could be at the board level at the next meeting, and I'll be sure we have the feedback from ABC.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Did that get you what you need? You sure? I'm not trying to cut anybody off, so we can take our time. Anybody else? We're good? Okay. Thank you, everybody. See ya.